Easy. It hurts, she moaned as the rancher's long gun rubbed against her back. The gun barrel pressed against my spine was still hot from the last man it killed. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just stood there in her empty kitchen, a wooden spoon trembling in her hand while the stranger's breath, ragged and desperate, warmed the back of her neck. Outside, the Colorado wind howled like a dying animal. Inside, there was only silence, except for the sound of blood dripping onto her clean floor. "Don't turn around," he said, his voice cracked, not with cruelty, but with pure exhaustion. "And don't scream or I'll," but he didn't finish. Because when Mai finally spoke, her voice was as steady as stone. "You're bleeding on my floor." 5 years she'd lived alone in that cabin. 5 years since her husband, Arthur, died in the mines. 5 years of empty beds and colder nights. And now on a February evening in 1883, an outlaw with a bullet wound had stumbled into her life, gun first. His name was Rowan Blackwood, 29 years old, wanted in 3 territories, with $800 on his head, dead or alive. But Mai didn't know that yet. All she knew was the weight of his Colt revolver against her back, the way his hand shook when he gripped her shoulder, the smell of gunpowder and sweat and winter cold clinging to his clothes. When he finally let her turn around, she saw him clearly. He was young, his face smeared with dirt, his eyes dark with pain and something else. Fear, maybe, or shame. The wound in his shoulder was bad. Not fatal, but close. The bullet had gone clean through, but the bleeding hadn't stopped. His shirt was black with it. "Sit," Mai said. Rowan stared at her. "What?" she repeated, her voice firm. "Sit down before you fall down. Unless you want to die standing in a stranger's kitchen." He wavered for a moment, then his knees buckled and he collapsed into her wooden chair. The gun clattered to the floor. Neither of them reached for it. Mai moved without thinking, her body taking over. She heated water on the stove, found the whiskey Arthur kept hidden in the cupboard, untouched for 5 years, and tore clean linen into strips. Her hands worked fast, efficient. She'd sewn up a horse's leg once. How different could a man be? When she poured the whiskey over the wound, Rowan bit down on his own fist to keep from screaming. His body went rigid, sweat beading on his forehead. And Mai, she felt something stir inside her that she thought was long dead. It was not pity, not exactly, but more like recognition. This man was alone, just like her. "Why are you helping me?" Rowan gasped, his voice tight with pain. Mai threaded the needle. "I don't know," she replied. But she did know. She just couldn't say it out loud. Not yet. Rowan stayed in the shed behind the house. It was small, just a bed, a stove, and the ghost of Arthur lingering in every corner. Mai brought him food and changed his bandages, but she didn't ask questions. For the first 2 days, they barely spoke. Rowan slept most of the time, his body fighting the fever from the wound. Mai came and went like a shadow, leaving soup, fresh water, and clean bandages, but never staying long. On the 3rd morning, however, something shifted. She found him trying to stand, one hand braced against the wall, his face pale with effort. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. "Need to check on my horse." "Your horse is fine," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Sit down before you tear those stitches." Rowan lowered himself back onto the bed, his jaw clenched. "I'm not used to being helpless." Mai set down the breakfast tray. "Neither am I. But sometimes we don't get a choice." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the lines etched around her eyes, the dark fall of her hair, the way she held herself like a woman who'd learned not to expect anything good from the world. "How long since your husband died?" he asked. 5 years. You never remarried." Mai's laugh was a bitter, unused sound. "Who would have me? A Chinese widow in a land that doesn't want me. Childless, with nothing but this failing ranch." She poured him a cup of coffee. "Besides, I wasn't interested, and now." The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but heavy. Mai didn't answer, just handed him the cup and left the shed. By the 4th day, Rowan could walk without much help. Mai found him in the stable brushing down his mare. His movements were careful, favoring his injured shoulder, but there was a gentleness in the way he handled the animal that surprised her. "She's beautiful," Mai said from the doorway. Rowan looked up. "Raised her from a foal. Saved up 3 months' wages to buy her off a rancher in Texas." He ran a hand down the horse's sleek neck. "She's the only thing in this world that's truly mine." I understood that feeling, the need to own something, to have a single thing that couldn't be taken away from you. She stepped into the stable, the scent of hay and horse comforting. "What was your life like before? Before I killed a man and became an outlaw?" Rowan's smile was rueful. "Nothing special. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, slept under the stars more nights than in a bed." He paused, his expression turning inward. "I was never good at staying in one place. Why not? No place ever wanted me to stay." Mai felt that truth like a punch to the chest. She knew what it meant to be unwanted, to be tolerated but not treasured. Arthur had been a good man, but he'd married her because he needed a wife, not because he loved her. And when he died, she'd mourned the loss of companionship more than the loss of love. "Tell me about him," Rowan said quietly. "Your husband?" Mai was surprised by the question. No one ever asked about Arthur anymore. He was steady, reliable. He worked hard in the mines and came home every night smelling like sulfur and rock dust. She leaned against the stable wall, the rough wood a comfort against her back. "We didn't talk much. He wasn't cruel, just absent. Even when he was sitting across from me at dinner, he was somewhere else in his mind." "Did you love him?" "I thought I did. Or maybe I just loved not being alone." Mai's voice dropped to a near whisper. "But when he died, I realized I'd been alone the whole time anyway." Rowan put down the brush and turned to face her fully. "That's the worst kind of loneliness, isn't it? Being with someone and still feeling like you're by yourself." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Mai saw it, the reflection of her own profound isolation in this stranger's face. This outlaw, who'd stumbled into her life with a bullet wound and a price on his head, understood her in a way Arthur never had. On the 5th morning, she mentioned Sheriff Brody. "He comes around sometimes," she said, her voice carefully flat. They were sitting at her kitchen table, the first time Rowan had been inside the main house since the first night. She'd made eggs and biscuits, and they ate in a comfortable silence until she spoke. "Checking on me," he says. "Making sure I'm safe." Rowan caught the way her jaw tightened when she said the sheriff's name. "He bothers you?" It wasn't a question. Mai stared at her plate. Arthur owed him money. $40 for fixing the roof. He died before he could pay it back. She pushed her food around with her fork, her appetite gone. "Brody thinks I should settle the debt another way." Rowan's hand on the table curled into a fist. "Has he touched you?" "Tried. I keep my rifle close when he visits." She looked up, meeting Rowan's intense gaze. "I'm not helpless, but I'm tired of being afraid in my own home." Rowan leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "If he comes while I'm here, you'll do nothing," Mai cut in firmly. "You shoot a lawman, even a corrupt one, and they'll hang you. I won't have that on my conscience." But Rowan didn't agree, and they both knew it. That very afternoon, 2 bounty hunters rode up to the ranch. Mai was hanging laundry when they arrived, 2 men with hard eyes and nervous trigger fingers. "We're looking for a man," one of them said, his gaze sweeping the property. "Outlaw. Wounded. Riding a brown mare. You seen anyone like that?" Mai's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a calm, unreadable mask. "Just me and the chickens out here." The second hunter narrowed his eyes, disbelieving. "You mind if we look around?" "I mind very much. This is private property. We got a legal right." Mai stepped toward them, her arms crossed over her chest. "You got a warrant?" "No." "Then you've got nothing but the road back to town." From the shed, Rowan watched through a crack in the wood, his hand clamped around the grip of his Colt. One word from Mai, and he'd have to shoot his way out or die trying. His finger rested on the trigger. 2 men, 2 shots. He could do it. He had done it before. But Mai didn't say a word. The bounty hunters exchanged glances, then one of them spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "All right. But if you see anything suspicious, you report it. There's money in it for you, I'll keep that in mind, she said, her voice dripping with ice. They circled the property once more, then finally rode off. Mai didn't move until they were a distant speck on the horizon. Then her knees buckled. She caught herself on the clothesline, breathing hard, the strength leaving her in a rush. When she finally made it to the shed, she found Rowan standing there, his gun still drawn, his chest heaving. "You could have turned me in," he said, his voice rough. $800. "That's more than you'll make in 2 years." "I could have," she agreed. "Why didn't you?" Mai met his eyes, and for the first time in 5 long years, she felt something crack open inside her. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted." Rowan lowered his gun slowly. "You ever killed a man, Mai?" "No," she answered, her gaze unwavering. "But I've wanted to." That raw, brutal honesty hung between them, more real than anything she'd felt in years. That night, she changed his bandage again, but this time, her hands moved slower, lingering on the edges of the wound, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. Rowan's breath hitched in his throat. His hand came up, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gently wrapped around her wrist. "You're healing well," Mai whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thanks to you," he murmured back. She should have pulled away. She should have kept the distance that propriety and safety demanded, but she didn't. Instead, she let her fingers trail down his arm, feeling the rough texture of scars from old fights, old wounds, old lives. "How long have you been alone?" Rowan asked quietly. 5 years and me too, he said. "My whole life." The fire crackled in the small stove. Outside, the wind screamed its lonely song. But in that small shed, something warm and dangerous began to grow between them. Rowan's thumb traced lazy circles on the soft skin of her wrist. "I'll be gone soon. The wound's almost healed. I know. Do you want me to go?" Mai looked at him, at this man who'd crashed into her life with violence and blood. This man who looked at her like she was more than just a widow, more than just a lonely woman on a failing ranch. "No," she whispered. "I don't." And that admission, that single, damning word, changed everything. Sheriff Brody arrived on a Thursday. He was drunk. Mai could smell it before he even got off his horse, that sour stench of whiskey and bitterness. His eyes were bloodshot, and his grin was crooked and mean. "Mai," he drawled, climbing the porch steps uninvited. "Heard there's been outlaws around. Thought I'd check on you." "I'm fine, Sheriff." "You can go." But Brody didn't go. He stepped closer, invading her space. His hand reached out, his fingers grazing her arm. "Your husband owed me money, Mai. $40. It's been 5 years now. I think it's time you settled up." Mai jerked her arm away. "Get out." Brody's grin vanished, replaced by a sneer. His hand shot out, grabbing her by the collar of her dress. "You think you're too good for me? You think?" The shed door slammed open. Rowan stood there, his Colt raised, his eyes as cold as a January morning. She said, "Get out." The Brody spun around, and a flash of recognition, then triumph, crossed his face. "Blackwood," he laughed, a low, nasty sound. "So, she is hiding you. You know what that makes her, boy? An accomplice. I'll hang her right beside you." He reached for his gun. Rowan was faster. The shot echoed across the empty hills. Birds scattered from the trees in a frantic cloud. Smoke curled from the barrel of Rowan's Colt, and Sheriff Brody collapsed on Mai's porch, blood spreading in a dark, final stain across the wooden planks. There was only silence. Mai stared at the body, at the man who had tormented her for years, now crumpled and still. Then she looked at Rowan, this outlaw who had killed for her without a moment's hesitation. "We have to bury him," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the sudden quiet. They dug the grave deep in the woods behind the ranch. They didn't speak, just shoveled dirt in the freezing dark until the hole was deep enough to hide a man forever. When it was done, they dragged Brody's body through the trees and dropped it in. They covered it, smoothed the earth, and left no marker. Back at the house, My scrubbed the blood from the porch while Rowan unsaddled the sheriff's horse. They worked in a grim, synchronized silence, moving like ghosts through their own lives. Inside, Rowan began packing his little bag. "You're leaving," My said. It was not a question. "I have to. When they find Brody's horse wandering, they'll come here first. If I'm gone, you can say I forced you, that you were scared, that you didn't know what to do." My's voice was hollow. "I know the story, Rowan." He looked at her then, really looked at her, this woman who'd saved him, hidden him, lied for him, and who was about to lose everything because of him. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy with a regret that went beyond the dead man outside. "Don't be." They didn't sleep that night. My built up the fire in the hearth, and Rowan sat beside her on the floor, so close that their shoulders touched. The heat from the flames painted their faces in gold and shadow. Outside, the world was frozen and hostile. Inside, something was beginning to thaw. If there was another way, Rowan started, but trailed off. "There isn't," My said, turning to face him. In the firelight, she didn't look like a grieving widow anymore. She looked like a woman on the edge of something wild and unknown. "This world doesn't make room for people like us." Rowan's hand found hers, his rough palm fitting perfectly against hers. "I'll remember you," he said quietly. Every day I closed her eyes, and tears she hadn't shed in years slipped down her cheeks. Then Rowan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her like she was something precious he was about to lose forever. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding on in the flickering light. And then Mai turned her face up to his. Rowan's breath caught in his chest. Their eyes met in the firelight, a question asked and answered without a single word. His hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing the sharp curve of her cheekbone. She leaned into the touch, hungry for it, starving for it after 5 years of nothing. When their lips met, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate. 5 years of loneliness crashing together with a lifetime of being on the run. She pulled him closer, her fingers tangling in his hair. He kissed her like a drowning man gulping for air, like she was the only solid thing in a world that wanted him dead. They pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, breathing hard. His voice was wrecked with emotion. She didn't let him finish. She just stood, took his hand, and led him to the bedroom. The room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through the window. Mai's fingers trembled as she began to unbutton her dress. Rowan's hands covered hers, stilling them. "You don't have to, I know," she whispered, looking up at him, her eyes dark pools in the faint light. "I want her." The dress slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet in a soft heap. Rowan's breath hitched. She stood before him in just her chemise, the thin fabric barely hiding the curves of her body. His eyes traced the line of her neck, the swell of her breasts, the gentle dip of her waist. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick. No one had called her beautiful in 5 years. She reached for him then, pulling his shirt over his head. Her hands explored the hard planes of his chest, the solid muscle, the bandage she'd tied just days ago. He shivered under her touch. They fell into bed together, a tangle of limbs and heat and overwhelming need. Rowan's mouth found hers again, then her neck, her collarbone, and lower still. Mai gasped, arching into him, alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. His hands roamed her body as if he were memorizing every inch. She pulled him closer, wrapped her legs around him, and whispered his name like a prayer. When he finally moved inside her, slow and deep, Mai cried out, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of being filled after so long of being empty. They moved together in the darkness, finding a rhythm as old as time itself. His hands gripped her hips, her nails dug into his shoulders. They chased a release that was desperate and raw and utterly real. Afterward, they lay tangled together, sweat slicked and breathing hard, his arm a heavy, comforting weight around her waist, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, slowing rhythm of his heart. "Stay," she whispered into the dark. But they both knew he couldn't. Rowan left before sunrise. Mai stood on the porch in her thin nightgown, watching him saddle his horse in the grey pre-dawn light. The cold bit through the fabric, but she barely felt it. He swung up into the saddle and looked down at her one last time. "I'll write to you when it's safer," I nodded, unable to speak. If she opened her mouth, she'd beg him to stay, and that wouldn't be fair to either of them. Rowan touched the brim of his hat in a final salute. Then he spurred his horse and rode south toward the border, toward Mexico, toward a life she couldn't follow. I watched until he was swallowed by the morning mist. Then she sank down onto the porch steps and sobbed, great heaving cries that she'd held back for 5 long years. She was alone again. 1 year later, in February 1884, the same bitter cold gripped the land, the same ranch stood empty, but something in Mai had changed. She still fed the chickens, still sold eggs in town, still slept alone. But there was a lightness to her now, a small, secret smile that touched her lips when she thought no one was watching. No one ever found Sheriff Brody. The town eventually assumed he'd run off with tax money. It wouldn't be the first time a lawman had disappeared into the territories with full pockets. Then, on a bright winter morning, the mail rider brought a letter. There was no return address, no postmark, just her name in a rough, familiar handwriting on the envelope. Mai's hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter and $200 in bills. Mai. I'm writing from a place where no one knows my name. I made it to Mexico. I have a small spread in the Sonora Highlands now. There's no law here, no bounty hunters. Just mountains and wind and quiet. I think about you every day. About that cabin. About our last night by the fire. About the way you looked at me, not like an outlaw, but like a man. The money's a start. I'll send more each month from honest work I found down here. I owe you more than my life. If you ever want to leave that place, leave the loneliness and the memories, come to Sonora. Ask for Ricardo Diaz in the village of Santa Rosa. That's the name I use now. I don't dare hope you'll come, but if you do, I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never have to be alone again. The man who remembers you, R.B. Mai read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Her tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. Then she stood, walked into the bedroom, and opened the old drawer where she kept her wedding ring, the simple gold band she'd worn for 5 years, even after Arthur died. She held it up to the morning light, studied it for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, she slid it off her finger and placed it on the table. She stood there, looking at the ring, the symbol of her past, her prison, her grief. Then she turned her back on it and walked out of the room. Mai stood on her porch, staring south toward the distant horizon. The letter from Mexico was clutched tightly in her hand. The wind pulled at her hair and tugged at her skirts. Behind her was the ranch, the chickens, the memories, everything she had ever known. Ahead, there was only the unknown. A new name in a new land, a man waiting in the mountains, a life she'd never dared to imagine for herself. For 5 years, she'd been a ghost, haunting the edges of her own life. But one man, an outlaw with a hot gun pressed to her back, had shown her what it meant to feel alive again. Did she have the courage to go? Or would she stay here with the ring and the memories and the safe, small life she knew? She didn't know yet. But for the first time in 5 years, she had a choice.